Betsy's regular route. Dusty Gulch wasn't much to look at. A cluster of sun-baked houses huddled around a single, dusty main street, punctuated by the faded glory of the Golden Nugget Saloon and the perpetually closed bait shop. Yet, to Miss Clementine Clover, it was home, and its residents, her extended family. And Betsy, her trusty school bus, was her steed on this daily journey of connection. The engine of Betsy, a robust yellow behemoth, coughed to life each morning at precisely 6:45 a.m. Miss Clementine, her grey hair neatly pinned beneath a floral scarf, checked her rearview mirror, adjusted her spectacles, and with a gentle lurch, Betsy began her regular route. Her first stop was the Ramirez house, a small adobe dwelling on the outskirts of town. As Betsy rumbled to a halt, Maria, her bright eyes sparkling, burst out the front door, her twin braids bouncing. "Buenos dias, Miss Clementine," she chirped, clambering aboard. "Buenos dias, M.I. Corazon," a Miss Clementine replied, her voice warm as sunshine. "Ready for fractions today?" Next was the Thompsons' farm, where young Billy, perpetually covered in dirt and sporting a gap-teethed grin, waited patiently. "Morning, Miss Clementine," he mumbled, clutching a wilted sunflower. "Found this for Y.A." "Why, Billy, that's just lovely," she said, carefully placing the sunflower in a chipped vase on the dashboard. "Thank you kindly." At the Johnsons', a symphony of barks announced the arrival of Betsy. Little Timmy, perpetually shy, shuffled onto the bus, his gaze fixed on his worn-out sneakers. Miss Clementine winked. "Heard any good jokes lately, Timmy?" she asked. A faint smile flickered across his face. Betsy continued her journey, a comforting presence against the stark landscape. She was more than just a bus. She was a mobile community center, a place for shared laughter, whispered secrets, and the quiet reassurance of a familiar face. Miss Clementine knew each bump in the road, each squeak in Betsy's aging frame, each child's unique story. But lately, something felt different. A prickle of unease settled on Miss Clementine's skin. It wasn't the children, they were their usual selves. It was, or a feeling of being watched. A fleeting glimpse of movement in the periphery. Something was amiss on Betsy's regular route, and Miss Clementine intended to find out what it was. A furry passenger. Miss Clementine Clover's stomach churned with a nameless dread as she pulled Betsy, her trusty bus, to a halt at the familiar stop. The air hung heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth, a smell usually comforting, but tonight it felt ominous. She adjusted her rearview mirror, her gaze lingering on the empty seats. Then she saw it. A bobcat, sleek and tawny, stood silhouetted against the fading twilight at the edge of the woods. Its amber eyes glowed with an unnerving intensity. Clementine gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. Bobcats weren't unheard of in these parts, but they rarely ventured so close to civilization, let alone waited for the bus. Before Clementine could react, the bobcat moved, gliding silently towards the open doors. A collective gasp rippled through the handful of passengers already on board. Mrs. Higgins clutched her purse to her chest, her eyes wide with terror. Little Timmy Johnson, usually bouncing with energy, froze, his jaw slack. The bobcat hesitated for a moment at the threshold, its gaze sweeping over the occupants. Then, with a surprising burst of agility, it leaped onto the first step and padded down the aisle, its claws clicking softly on the linoleum floor. A hushed silence fell over the bus, broken only by the rhythmic thumping of Clementine's heart. Instead of attacking, or even hissing, the bobcat simply settled itself in the very last row of seats, curling up into a ball as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Its eyes, however, remained alert, constantly scanning its surroundings. Clementine, her mind reeling, cautiously put Betsy back in gear. What on earth was she supposed to do? Call animal control? Eject the wild animal into the night? Neither option seemed particularly appealing or safe, given the circumstances. For now, she decided, she would just drive. And pray. Unusual behavior. The morning sun caught Miss Clementine Clover's rearview mirror in a blinding flash. 6th and Elm. Again. There she was. The Bobcat. For 3 mornings running, the same feline figure haunted the bus stop, emerging from the Oaks umbrage just as Miss Clementine's bus wheezed into view. The first encounter had nearly sent her coffee flying. Now, a familiar disquiet twisted in her gut as she neared the corner. Rascal, as she'd mentally dubbed her, boarded with a cautious elegance, amber eyes flitting across the empty seats. Unlike the boisterous kids or the road-weary adults, Rascal possessed a quiet resolve. She invariably chose the back, melting into the corner, her dappled coat camouflaged against the faded fabric. It wasn't just a Bobcat on the bus, odd as that was. It was her composure. Her lack of apparent savagery. No snarls, no snapping, no panicked scramble for escape. Just a still, steady observation. Miss Clementine stole a glance in the mirror. Rascal was there, a silent stowaway. What was her destination? What drove her? Every day, Rascal rode 5 stops, then hopped off near the dilapidated lumber mill on the edge of town. Miss Clementine, who'd piloted this route for 15 years, knew every inch of it. The mill was a forlorn place, choked with weeds and steeped in shadow. Abandoned. A no-man's land. Except, it seemed, for a Bobcat. A tremor skittered down Miss Clementine's spine. This wasn't merely a stray. This felt deliberate. Driven. She tightened her grip on the wheel, knuckles bone-white. As the bus rumbled toward 6th and Elm the following morning, Miss Clementine resolved she couldn't simply keep passing by, feigning ignorance. She needed answers. She had to understand. Complaints and concerns. Ms. Clover. Beatrice clutched her oversized handbag to her chest, her voice a shrill whistle. That thing is shedding on my new slacks. Miss Clementine peered into the rearview mirror. Rascal, the Bobcat, was indeed midgroom, a flurry of tawny fur swirling around him. He blinked back at her, amber eyes placid. Now, Beatrice, I'm sure a lint roller won't fix potential rabies, bellowed Mr. Abernathy from the back, his face flushed a dangerous shade of purple. I pay good money for this bus service. I expect a safe, animal-free commute. A chorus of murmurs rippled through the bus. A young woman with bright pink hair nervously adjusted her headphones, avoiding eye contact. A construction worker grumbled under his breath about union regulations. Even Mrs. Higgins, usually a font of saccharine smiles, offered Miss Clementine a tight-lipped frown. Clementine sighed. All right, everyone, let's just stay calm. He hasn't bothered anyone, has he? Bothered? Beatrice sputtered. It's a wild animal. It could attack at any moment. My Harold has a prize-winning Persian. I know danger when I see it. Rascal yawned, displaying a surprisingly impressive set of teeth. A collective gasp went through the bus. Miss Clover, a Mr. Abernathy pressed, his voice dangerously low. Are you going to do something about this situation, or are we going to have to take matters into our own hands? Clementine's stomach churned. She glanced at Rascal, who was now meticulously cleaning his pores. He seemed utterly oblivious to the rising tension. She had no idea where he was going, why he kept appearing on her bus. But something about his quiet persistence tugged at her. Look, Ishi said, trying to project an air of authority she didn't feel. I understand your concerns. I do. But let's just try to remain civil. I'll keep an eye on him. And if he causes any trouble, I promise, I'll take action. The grumbling didn't cease, but it did subside slightly. Clementine gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles white. She felt the weight of their collective anxiety pressing down on her. She just hoped she could keep her promise. And that rascal wouldn't decide to start chasing squirrels up and down the aisle. Following rascal. Miss Clementine clapped her hands, the sound echoing in the otherwise quiet bus. All right, rascal, time to go. Show's over. The Bobcat, perched regally on the seat behind the driver, merely blinked, then resumed meticulously grooming his already immaculate fur. Clementine sighed. This was getting ridiculous. She grabbed her broom, lightly tapping it on the floor near Rascal. Out! Shoo! Rascal, with a yawn that displayed an impressive array of teeth, hopped gracefully to the floor and sauntered towards the back exit. Clementine watched, broom still in hand, as he waited patiently for the doors to hiss open at his usual stop, a cluster of towering pines at the edge of the Blackwood forest. He didn't even glance back as he disembarked. Clementine pulled the bus to the curb, her mind a whirlwind of questions and a strange, prickling sense of unease. This couldn't be normal Bobcat behavior. She killed the engine, grabbed her thickest cardigan, and stepped out, locking the doors behind her. The forest floor was a tapestry of damp leaves and exposed roots. The air hung heavy with the scent of pine and decaying wood. Clementine could hear the distant rush of a creek. She spotted Rascal a few yards ahead, his spotted coat blending seamlessly with the dappled sunlight filtering through the trees. He wasn't running, wasn't even hurrying. He was simply, or walking, with a clear sense of purpose. Curiosity, and a growing feeling that something wasn't right, propelled Clementine forward. She kept her distance, careful not to startle him. The woods grew denser, the shadows longer. Thorns snagged at her cardigan, and the uneven ground made her ankles ache. Clementine almost turned back, but then she saw Rascal disappear behind a thicket of brambles. Taking a deep breath, she pushed her way through, emerging into a small, overgrown clearing. The hidden den. The school bus idled, coughing exhaust into the crisp morning air. Miss Clementine watched Rascal disappear into the Blackwood forest, a peculiar urgency in his gait. He hadn't lingered, hadn't cast a backward glance. It wasn't like him. Curiosity, a familiar itch, took hold. She killed the engine, grabbed her walking stick, a gnarled piece of oak her grandfather had given her, and followed. The woods were hushed, save for the rustle of unseen creatures in the undergrowth. Miss Clementine moved cautiously, her sensible shoes crunching on fallen leaves. Rascal's tracks, visible in the damp earth, led her deeper, past ancient oaks draped with moss and patches of ferns unfurling in the dappled sunlight. The air grew thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. Then, she saw it, a low, almost invisible opening beneath the exposed roots of an overturned tree. The entrance was cleverly concealed by a tangle of thorny vines. Rascal's scent was strong here. Heart pounding, Miss Clementine pushed aside the vines, peering into the darkness. A soft mewling reached her ears. She knelt, her knees protesting, and shone her flashlight into the den. Nestled within a bed of dried leaves and rabbit fur were 4 tiny kittens, no bigger than her hand. Their eyes were barely open, their pink noses twitching. And Rascal. Rascal lay beside them, his usually sleek fur matted, his ribs showing through. He looked exhausted, but his eyes held a fierce protectiveness. The realization hit Miss Clementine like a physical blow. These weren't his kittens. He'd found them, orphaned and alone. And he was trying to keep them alive. The stolen scraps from the bus, the unusual boldness, it all made sense now. He wasn't a nuisance. He was desperate. A wave of tenderness washed over her, so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. She understood now. Understood the silent plea in his amber gaze. He wasn't sneaking onto her bus for himself. A helping hand. The next morning, Miss Clementine packed an extra sandwich. Ham and Swiss on rye. Rascal didn't seem picky. When she spotted the Bobcat slipping into the usual thicket, Clementine killed the engine. All right, folks, just a 5-minute pit stop. She grabbed the sandwich, its aroma sharp against the cool morning air, and hopped off Betsy. Rascal emerged cautiously, eyes narrowed, a low growl rumbling in her chest. Clementine tore the sandwich in half, extending a piece. Here you go, girl. You look like you haven't slept in days. Rascal edged closer, sniffing the offering. The growl subsided, replaced by a hesitant curiosity. She snatched the sandwich half, retreating to the shadows to devour it. Clementine watched, her heart aching at the Bobcat's gaunt frame. The next day, Clementine brought a small container of leftover chicken and rice. This time, Rascal didn't hesitate. She ate every morsel, her eyes meeting Clementine's with a flicker of something that might have been gratitude. That's when Clementine heard it, a faint, mewling sound drifting from deeper in the thicket. What was that? Ear voice called from the bus. It was Mrs. Gable, her face etched with concern. Clementine hesitated, then sighed. It's kittens. Rascal's got kittens hidden in there. A collective murmur rippled through Betsy. Mr. Henderson, usually scowling behind his newspaper, lowered it. Kittens, you say? Orphaned kittens, I think, Clementine clarified. Their mother? She trailed off, unable to say the words out loud. The atmosphere on Betsy shifted. Fear, a constant companion since Rascal's appearances, began to dissipate, replaced by a nascent kindness. Mrs. Gable rummaged in her bag, producing a can of tuna. Give her this, as she said, her voice softer than Clementine had ever heard it. For the little ones. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. I've got some milk at home. I'll bring it tomorrow. As Clementine walked back onto the bus, she saw not apprehension in her passenger's eyes, but a shared purpose. The engine purred to life, and Betsy rumbled down the road, carrying not just people, but a newfound compassion for a wild creature and her tiny, vulnerable family. The air inside felt lighter, warmer, as if a long winter had finally begun to thaw. The Kindness Cruiser. Miss Clementine pulled the Kindness Cruiser, as she privately called her bus, into its designated spot at the depot. The scent of pine needles and something faintly musky clung to the air, a subtle reminder of her unusual passenger. She reached for her radio. Dispatch, this is Clover. Requesting a call to animal control. Non-emergency, but I have a situation. Dispatch crackled back. Copy that, Clover. Animal control patched through. Miss Clementine explained about Rascal and the kittens, carefully omitting the bus rides. She didn't want to risk her job. The woman on the other end, a kind voice named Brenda, listened patiently. Bring her in. We have space. We'll take good care of them. The next morning, with a borrowed crate and a heart full of hope, Miss Clementine coaxed Rascal and her mewling brood into her car. The shelter buzzed with activity, barking dogs, chirping birds, and the comforting scent of disinfectant. Brenda greeted them warmly, her eyes crinkling at the corners. Oh, aren't they precious? You did a good thing, bringing them here. Rascal, surprisingly, seemed calm, accepting a bowl of wet food Brenda offered. As the kittens suckled, Miss Clementine felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She'd done the right thing. Days turned into weeks. The bus route felt different, lighter. The early morning chill didn't seem as biting. Miss Clementine still scanned the roadside for Rascal, a habit ingrained now. One evening, rounding a bend near the old logging road, she saw her. Rascal, sleek and healthy, was crouched low, a plump rabbit clutched in her jaws. Their eyes met. A flicker of recognition, then Rascal disappeared into the undergrowth. Miss Clementine smiled. The kindness cruiser was back to its regular route, but the memory of her wild passengers and the warmth of knowing she'd helped filled every mile. Dusty Gulch's heart. Dusty Gulch was practically vibrating with good cheer. Banners proclaiming a welcome home, bobcats, fluttered above Main Street, strung between the saloon and Mrs. Higgins' Emporium. A makeshift stage had been erected in the square, where Mayor Mildred Macmillan, beaming like a freshly polished apple, was about to present Betsy with the key to the city. Betsy, cheeks flushed pink, stood beside her trusty bus, their Dusty Gulch delight. Children swarmed around, their laughter echoing off the dusty buildings. Someone had even tied a large, slightly lopsided, bow made of burlap to the front bumper. And for her unwavering compassion and quick thinking, Mayor Macmillan announced, her voice amplified by a crackling microphone, "We hereby dub Betsy, the kindness cruiser." A roar of applause erupted. Betsy, overwhelmed, could only manage a small wave. She saw Miss Clementine Clover, the school bus driver, standing near the back, a gentle smile gracing her lips. Miss Clementine raised a hand in a silent salute, then turned and headed toward her own bus, its yellow paint gleaming in the afternoon sun. Later, as Miss Clementine drove her route, the image of the Bobcat family haunted her thoughts. She remembered seeing a lone bobcat, most likely Rascal, near the old Miller farm, its sleek fur blending seamlessly with the tall grass. He looked healthy, strong, completely at home. A small thrill ran through Miss Clementine. He was hunting, providing. Life, she thought, always found a way. The setting sun cast long shadows across the desert landscape as she made her final stop. A lone tumbleweed bounced across the road, a reminder of the harshness of the environment. But even here, in Dusty Gulch, a place where survival was a daily challenge, there was room for kindness, for compassion. Miss Clementine smiled. She adjusted her rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of the vibrant sunset. Tomorrow, she knew, she would be back on the road, carrying her precious cargo, a quiet guardian of Dusty Gulch's heart.